This is BBC News. I'm Ben Brown. The headlines at 3. Thousands of homes are still without power after the devastating storms that swept across northern Britain this weekend. In Cumbria, police who were searching for an elderly man thought to have fallen into a river have found a body. Residents are still being led to safety. Many schools are closed and hospitals affected too. David Cameron will visit some of the worst hit areas this afternoon.
Our emergency services did a brilliant job coping in very difficult conditions. We think first of the victims of the floods, but we make sure we learn any lessons afterwards.
Also in the next hour, an inquiry says the driver of the Glasgow bin lorry that killed 6 people repeatedly lied about his medical history. The President of the European Council says he expects a deal at a summit in February to prevent Britain leaving the EU. The BBC understands the decision on whether to build a new runway at Heathrow or Gatwick looks likely to be delayed for at least 6 months. And Britain's changing society, how half the population now say they're non-religious. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News. A man's body has been pulled from a river in Cumbria after a devastating storm hit parts of northern England, Scotland and Wales. Storm Desmond saw the highest ever amount of rainfall recorded in the UK in one day. In Cockermouth in Cumbria, homes and fields were deluged after waters overtopped multi-million-pound defences that were built to protect the town after the last serious floods just 6 years ago. In Carlisle, rescue crews are still trying to reach all of those stranded in their homes. At least 5,000 families have been evacuated across the north of England and Scotland, while thousands are spending a third day without power. Christian Fraser has our first report.
It is slowly receding. But this morning, Carlisle was still under several feet of water. The River Eden burst its banks on Sunday, and at the peak of the flooding, there were some areas of this city where ground floor rooms were filled almost to the ceiling. This is Carlisle United's football ground, a basin for the floodwater. There are whole neighbourhoods that remain cut off, the city centre dissected by a giant lagoon. This family were rescued from the garage of their property, down a ladder, into the waiting boat. Well, this is Warwick Road, one of the main routes through Carlisle, which frankly looks like a canal. There are still people in their houses down here who stuck it out for 36 hours, but it's cold, food and water is running out, and there are more and more calls coming in. The emergency rescue teams have come from all around the country, and they are busy.
We've pulled out, well, evacuated probably 8 people so far. We've just been tasked with another one. It's a medical emergency. We've got an elderly lady down there.
So some have tried to stick it out in their homes, I was just saying, but obviously with the electricity being out, it's grim, isn't it? It
is, yeah. I mean, there's around about 2,500 properties affected. A third of those, the residents decided to actually stay put last night. They're now obviously thinking that was a sort of a bad decision and they want out.
In Keswick, Appleby, Cockermouth, Kendal, across huge swathes of Cumbria, similar scenes. Over 3,000 homes and livelihoods destroyed. In Kendal, police discovered the body of an elderly man who fell into the River Kent yesterday. Storm Desmond delivered persistent, unprecedented rainfall, so much so that for the first time in living memory, a waterfall formed over Malham Cove in the Yorkshire Dales. This morning in London, the Prime Minister chaired a meeting of the emergency committee, Cobra.
Our hearts all go out to those families who've been driven out of their homes by floodwater, many of whom will have had a very worrying 48 hours, some people stuck in their houses or people stuck in care homes, and I think the emergency services have done a brilliant job.
There are questions across Cumbria as to whether the flood defences built after 2005 and 2009 have worked. The Environment Agency uses sophisticated modelling to plan and predict these events, but seemingly not on this scale. The City Council in Carlisle has demanded an inquiry, but for now there are other priorities. In the days ahead, they will need to support thousands of residents who face a miserable new year.
Well, dozens of residents in Carlisle whose homes were flooded are being allowed back into their properties to assess the damage. Our correspondent Sarah Corker has been visiting some of those who are now going back.
Another day and another family is rescued from their flood-hit home in Carlisle. Damp and cold, Mary Weston and her grandchildren were lifted to safety on Warwick Road.
We've been staying with my daughter. My youngest grandson's got diabetes type 1, so we needed to make sure that he was all right. He is fine, he's absolutely fine, but to get him out for safety as well.
Others were returning to their properties to salvage what they could. I met the Paytons, who, like many here, have been through all of this before, back in 2005.
I don't even know if I can speak, because it's the second time we've gone through it.
I'll just ask you instead then, so I know it's extremely difficult. What's happened to your property, and this has happened before, hasn't it?
Downstairs is completely destroyed, and it's just heartbreaking because everything was set for Christmas, all the decorations were up, and it was just going to have a nice special family Christmas this year.
The council has been busy unblocking drains, clearing gullies so that this flood water has somewhere to go. The levels have been dropping, but very slowly, and when the water does leave, behind is left rubbish, mud and sewage. Marion Riley was cleaning out her elderly mother's house where the floor had buckled.
This is everything. This is the mess. This is my mum, as I say, trying to stop the water coming through the door. And then eventually they heard that sound, right? And she knew it was coming up through the floorboards.
And there is a sense of resilience here. Across the road, another family stripped the floorboards, determined to get back for Christmas. For many, this is a flashback to the 2005 floods, and once again, the city is rallying together. Sarah Corker, BBC News in Carlisle.
Let's cross to our correspondent in Kendal, Colin Patson. Just heartbreaking, some of these scenes, Colin. Talk us through where you are now.
Yeah, we were on the banks of the River Kent, which runs through Kendal. We heard the very sad news this morning that the police have found the body of a man. We do believe it is the elderly gentleman who was reported missing yesterday morning at 10 a.m. He was found at Staveley, which is about 5 miles just outside of Kendal. But around us are the very familiar scenes of people cleaning up their businesses. This is possibly the most random item I have found in the street today. A till washed out of one of the riverside cafes here. We even spoke to Tim Farron, the local MP and leader of the Lib Dems, earlier in the news channel, and he told us that he was driving in his Volvo past the banks off a river when it burst, and he ended up having to abandon his Volvo, pull his 3 kids and a child belonging to a friend of theirs out of the car, and his car has been written off. But he says at least he has a warm, clean house to go home to. Not many people have that here. Lee Howard is a local resident, and tell us the situation that you've been through.
Yeah, well, our home is just along the banks of the River Kent there, and yeah, unfortunately we were flooded on Saturday. Came about a metre high. Luckily we could stay at my mum's house, which is further up the hill in Kendal, but also my wife's business, which is further down the river. That was also badly affected, again about a metre. So that's the sort of our focus at the moment, as we're a bakery and sort of trying to prepare for Christmas. And
so you should be baking Christmas cakes instead you're cleaning out water.
We should, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, how bad a time is that for it to hit you?
Well, it is the worst time. Yeah, just now as well, because we're just in the process of getting the orders out, and we had, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of Christmas cakes ready wrapped, all labelled, all ready to go out to orders, and they're all ruined now, unfortunately. Yeah.
Some people will be watching this thinking, listen, we know we get flooding, and you don't get as much sympathy as you might get because they say, well, they live by a river, they should know. What would you say to them?
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, that's true. But this has never happened here before to this extent. I've lived here for 40 years, and it's really unprecedented. It's never happened. Yes, we get sporadic parts of flooding, little areas get flooded, but not to this extent. And our house, as far as I'm aware, hasn't flooded. Well, ever, as far as I'm aware, yeah.
So where do you go from here? How do you start to rebuild your life?
Well, you just do, don't you? You carry on, you try and get on with it, you know, look on the bright side, all those positive things, and sort of get a lot of help from friends and family.
Has it made you consider whether you want to stay here now?
Certainly, I will stay in Kendal, absolutely. It's perhaps made us think about having both our home and business in close proximity to the river. I think that it's perhaps made us think about having both our home and business in close proximity to the river. I think that things there may need to change, yeah, certainly.
What should have changed before? I mean, we're hearing a lot of talk about the flood defences not being brought in. How much of a difference would they have made? I
honestly don't think, certainly for Kendal, I can only speak for here, I don't think flood defences would have made a difference here, because the River Kent, it can rise quickly, but it always goes down quickly as well. So we do get heavy rain, but the rain I think we had on Saturday it felt unprecedented. It felt like something that we'd never experienced before, really.
Unprecedented is the word we keep hearing, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I should point out as well, across there is the BBC in Kendal, which is shut because it is flooded too.
Colin, thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Well, let's go now to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's in Westminster for us. And Vicky, let's just talk about the political fallout of all of this, because Labour saying that people affected by the flooding over the weekend will be angry at David Cameron's broken promises.
Yeah, that's right, and they're referring to spending on flood defences over the years. And although capital spending on those flood defences was kept at a certain level, on the other side of it, which is the flood maintenance, Labour say that actually that hasn't kept pace with where it should have been. They are suggesting that actually that has fallen back over the years. And there are some interesting strategic issues here, if you like. Listening to David Cameron today, we're about to hear from Liz Truss, the Environment Secretary, who's going to make a statement in the House of Commons at 3:30. They say that, yes, of course, they must keep the flood defences up, but you've got to also look at what's happened in the last few days. If you look at what's happened in Cumbria, for example, the Prime Minister's official spokeswoman said this morning that actually the numbers, it was half a metre higher than it was during the 2005 floods, and that in itself was half a metre higher than the previous record back in 1853. So as that gentleman we were just hearing from there says, what difference in the end would it have made? You've got to look at the money you've got to look at the premises that you are defending, and in the end you have to look at the areas where there are the most people, where the most damage can be done, and make sure that these flood defences are of course in the right place. But in the end you can't stop the rain, and these things do seem to be happening. What's interesting is whether they now go sort of back to square one and have a look at the models that they have about weather systems, and to see whether actually they are looking at them in the right way, or whether we're going to have to get used to these extreme weather events where there does just seem to be more flooding and these rivers rising to a much greater height.
OK, Vicky, thank you very much indeed. That's Vicky Young there, our chief political correspondent.
Oh, well, let's pick up exactly there now. Joining us, our weather forecaster, John Hammond. And Vicky was talking about models of weather systems. Nobody's mentioned climate change up to this point, John. Is there any sense of whether this is becoming more regular, or whether we're having to look at something that could be changing permanently? It's a big one, really.
Well, you've heard this line before. You can't put any one event down to climate change, but it absolutely is it's consistent, should I say, that in a warmer climate you've got more energy in the atmosphere, and with more energy in the atmosphere you have deeper low pressure systems, more storms, and that means more extreme weather events. Now this one, Desmond, the fourth in the series, by the way, that we've already had through this autumn-winter period, that was responsible, if you like, in two ways. It drew in some extraordinarily warm air from the subtropics, and it was the strength of the wind which supplied moisture, saturated air, up through the Irish Sea. It hit the Cumbrian Fells like that, and when warm, saturated air hits high ground, it's forced to rise, and that's what causes cooling, huge clouds, and colossal amounts of rain. So in answer to your question, yes, it's totally consistent with the idea that climate change will bring more extreme weather events, but you cannot put one event down to climate
of course. But if you're looking at the pattern of flooding in this country now, you can say we had terrible floods 2 years ago at this time, December, New Year. This part of the country in Cumbria was hit badly 6 years ago. The flood defences built as a result. Are we starting to expect the same sort of areas to be hit in the same way more often now? I mean, it would get to a point where, you know, people are starting to look at their own houses and thinking, do I repair, do I sell, do I move on?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Cumbria is it is particularly prone to sort of instantaneous rainfall. There are different types of flooding, if you like. The sort of flooding which affected the Thames Valley, the Somerset levels last winter, or the winter before last, that was due to sort of prolonged rainfall over weeks and weeks and weeks. The sort of flooding we've had over the last few days is due to instantaneous rainfall. And yes, somewhere like Cumbria, southwest Scotland, is particularly prone because they are at the forefront, if you like, of this warm, extraordinarily warm, moist subtropical air, which comes up through the Irish Sea, hits the high ground, is forced to rise, generates huge clouds, and then all that water is funneled down through the lakeland valleys. So, I mean, we've had 340 odd millimetres, which doesn't sound a lot, does it? It's just over a foot. But of course that all gets channeled through the river valleys and it soon becomes that. So yes, Cumbria particularly prone, and with more extreme weather events likely, that's likely to increase.
Heartbreaking stuff. John, thank you very much.
And just to say that coming up at 4:30, we're going to be joined by a lawyer who specialises in flooding insurance claims. So you can put your questions to him by texting us on 61124. Email us on haveyoursay@bbc.co.uk, or you can tweet us using the hashtag #BBCAskThis.
The headlines on BBC News just after 3:15. As you've been hearing, a body has been found in the River Kent in Kendal following reports that an elderly man had fallen into the water.
The inquiry into the Glasgow bin lorry crash in which 6 people died last December has found the tragedy could have been avoided if the driver had not lied about his history of blackouts.
The President of the European Council says there's a strong will among EU countries to satisfy British demands for reform.
And in a moment, the BBC has learned that a decision on whether to build a new runway at Heathrow or Gatwick now looks likely to be delayed for at least 6 months.
And in sports, suspended FIFA president Sepp Blatter is being investigated by the FBI over his role in a bribery scandal the BBC has discovered. It's alleged that a sports marketing company paid FIFA officials in return for TV rights during the 1990s. England batsman